We're sort of on the edge of what the ISKCON property was back in the 70s. At some point, they built some small buildings, but you know, it's a little vague in my mind. Of course, the Samadhi wasn't here, but the Pukur was, you know, the little pond. And we're going to walk over now to what was the old kitchen. And current use is a brahmachari ashram for the devotees who take care of the Samadhi. And the building looks a lot nicer than it did at that time. So this was the old kitchen, this building over here. And these fancy window decorations, that wasn't there. In fact, there was straight bars on the windows. Now they have a nice peacock grill. But none of this decoration and pillars and all that, it was totally plain. And this entrance wasn't there. The entrance was on the other side. But one thing is, when we're walking here, we can see the entrance to the Prasadam hall. And that was here as well. But they've added on an extension in more recent years, and that's now where they're cooking. So this is now called the Sulav Prasadam hall. But in the old days, it was just the big kitchen. The kitchen itself was on the first floor of this building, and the Western women and one or two Indian ladies lived upstairs. There was no water upstairs. So we had to come outside to use the bathroom. So let's go over there. These green trees are where the bathroom was. It was a round bathroom, and all the doors on the outside were for the men, and then there was an inner entrance, and the ladies are on the inside, so we had a little protection. Hand pumps was the source of water. In fact, that's all we had for water. There was no question of buying water. It didn't exist. There was no bottled water. And also this big kitchen, all the devotees who lived in Mayapur, either you eat here or you starve. There was no stores. There was no question of buying anything to eat. Finally, after a long time, they did start one store, one shop, which was the Mahaprasadam shop. But, you know, it was only sweets. That was just to satisfy our sweet tongue. It wasn't nourishing, really. So let's see, this service gate was here. Okay. Well, they've really changed it. So the entrance to this building, the only entrance, well, there was a connection to the Prasadam hall, but this was a big an entrance that jeeps could drive in there and deliver boga and plates and whatever. But you know, there was a major entrance here, and there's a courtyard in the middle. I don't know what it's like now. There was a long time when Grihastas lived here before it was a brahmachari ashram. So I have been inside at some point to see when they converted to Grihasta living, but I don't know what it's like now. It was a courtyard the trucks could pull in, and the first floor was up a little high, so they could it was like a loading dock. Like the whole thing was like a loading dock. And those kitchens were really, the burners were really hot. In the wintertime, that was nice because I'd lie down on the floor above the stove. My bedroom was above the stoves, and it was nice and warm, and it felt good. But in the summertime, I couldn't live in there. And the birds would come in and take over the room. And then in the wintertime, it would have a hard time getting them to go out, because there was little openings big enough for the birds to get in and out. So this is basically looks the way it did, but I mean, there wasn't these stores, there was just doors and window, door, window, the whole thing. And this is where the Bengali ladies lived with their children. Mostly the girls, because as soon as the boys were school age, they were in the Gurukula. And the Gurukula was on the far side of the main gate. But every single one of these rooms along the boundary wall was residence. There was no stores whatsoever. So Srila Prabhupada used to walk down this path along the boundary wall. There's pictures of him. I have a picture of Prabhupada walking down here in my book. So this is all sacred land. Sacred in the sense that, you know, Lord Chaitanya's birthplace, and sacred because the, you know, pure devotee of Lord Chaitanya, he walked here. So, you know, I was saying that I always see Mayapur through the filter of way it was. Like every time I go by this tree, I think about that bathroom. So, and Prabhupada actually even went in the bathroom once. You know that story and how it was dirty? You can tell. Well, we'll walk to the front gate and I'll tell you. Okay. Because Prabhupada was caring about every little detail of Mayapur. It wasn't like he just gave it to us to run, and he was very hands-on managing in India. So when he was in Mayapur, he would take walks, he would go check things out. He'd get upset if he found a fan was on and the room was locked up, and that happens sometimes because the electricity would go off, and then you'd forget that the fan was on, and then you'd go out, and then the room would be locked, and no one could even get in there to turn it off. He didn't like that. He saw that as a sign of our mismanagement. So, the story about the bathroom is that he came and poked his cane and opened a door, and I mean, they told us it was the women's bathroom, but you know, there was outer rooms, but I'm presuming he went inside. And the problem was that we couldn't train up the Bengalis. They're used to passing in the fields. That's how they grew up. And the concept of a room, it just was so foreign to them. And maybe the ladies could figure it out, but they couldn't train their kids. And you also had to pump the water to throw the water down to make it flush, and that took time and energy and having a bucket. So the result was we gave up trying to train them up, and we just locked up a couple of the toilets, and the 6 or 7 Western women all had a key. So they were nice and clean. But the ones that were just open were never clean. I mean, like really awful. So that's what Prabhupada saw. But none of the ladies were there when Prabhupada went in to explain anything to him. I think the men tried to explain it, but Prabhupada didn't go for that. So these are all just rooms, simple rooms, none of these stores. So at this point it's all stores, but these were all rooms. The men were living along the wall here, the boundary wall. And also on the street side, there wasn't anything. Just at festival time, 1 or 2 tea stalls would open, and then some rickshaw wallows would show up because they knew there was business. But then as soon as the festival was over, they would disappear. There was nothing permanent outside the front gate. In fact, pretty much all the way to Hulargat, there was nothing. So all of the buildings along the road just weren't there back in the 70s. And there actually wasn't any buildings between our ISKCON property and the yoga pit. There was nothing. Fields. The funny thing is I don't really remember where the samadhi is now. I mean, I remember the pukur, but beyond that, I guess it was just land, you know. So now we hear the 24-hour kirtan. So back in the 70s, there wasn't a 24-hour kirtan in the Bhajan Kutir. It was in the temple room. Yeah, so now we're at the front gate. So it officially opened when Prabhupada arrived in 1976. It was here for the festival in 75, but it wasn't complete. It was just scaffolding under construction. But it was completely done, completely painted. And Prabhupada arrived with a big kirtan going on. We had been outside chanting for a long time when he arrived. And then when Prabhupada got here, we all paid obeisances, and then somebody handed him a pair of scissors, and he cut the ribbon. And we all cheered, and then he walked through the gate. So you see how there's a little room upstairs on the main gate? That was where the Shehnai players were sitting. A little group of them. And yeah, look out the front gate, and you really just see fields, and far away you can see the Ganga. There was none of these buildings blocked the view. Actually, where we're standing right now is, well, where this inquiry booth is, sort of, there was a building here. It was I don't know why it had steps up one level, maybe because they wanted to build it flood-proof. And it was a go-down. Maybe part of it, they had a loom, and they were making dhotis and saris. There was cottage industry of cloth making going on here. Some of the men were doing that. But it was kind of an ugly building, and right here, right at the front, you know. The boundary wall continues. So we walked down the boundary wall, and this is where the little boys' Gurukula was, and they had classes outside. The rooms were the ashram, and classes were outside. I'm going to go offer obeisances to Prabhupada. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, It's all closed right now. It must be taking care of Prabhupada. Also, the altar wasn't here before. I don't know what year they added on space for the altar, but Nitai Pada Kamala Gorni Thai, who Prabhupada installed, they reside here. They used to travel on the bus. Not on the bus, on the boat. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Yeah, we didn't have any kind of medical facilities back in those days. I can't remember anybody even having a Band-Aid available.
Even Ayurvedic?
Nothing. There was nothing. Yeah. Well, two of the ladies, Swati and Kamaduk, I'm not sure if they were trained or just took on being the midwives. Just out of necessity, because women were having babies, and so they would deliver them. But I don't remember any facility being here, or if you needed something, where you would go. I don't remember any facilities.
Have you go into Navadip?
we would rarely go to Navadvip, but I just don't remember anybody having to go, needing to go, but there must have been, right? It seemed like Calcutta was like, I have to go all the way to Calcutta. I don't know. Anyway, now this is what the whole boundary wall used to look like, right? Just a door and a window, a door and a window. So it's like a one room with one window, one door. The whole thing looked like this. Well, you know what? They actually had shutters. Actually, the rooms had shutters. Now they just have screens. They don't even. Well, they have shutters on the inside. Well, maybe that's the way it was. Maybe that's the way it was. I seem to remember shutters being on the outside, but I don't know. Yeah. So now we're going to walk over to the Long Building. Now, the Long Building was Prabhupada's brainchild, and he arrived here in '76. He knew that the devotees were going to be arriving within about 6 weeks, and there didn't seem to be enough facilities for the number of devotees they were expecting. And they knew how many were coming, I believe, because at that time we all traveled in groups to get here. It isn't like anybody figured out how to get here on their own. So they knew how many were coming, and so Prabhupada had the idea, and they were saying, Prabhupada, how can we build this in 6 weeks? And he just said, just try, and they started. It's 5 times longer than the Lotus building. So we all called it the Long Building, and I still call it the Long Building. I mean, they do have another name, the Chakra Building. But they say it was the longest building in West Bengal, which may be true. Also, Prabhupada had the idea of making rooms on the ground floor. They were building it high because of the floods. There were a lot of floods in the 70s. And that space was just going to be for flood water. And then Prabhupada had the idea that you can enclose them, make them into rooms. And in one darshan, he was telling us how just for a few rupees, he was able to get so many more square feet of space. It was brilliant, right? Except that at flood time, it is flooded. But, most of the time it's not flood time. Most floods are only lasting 2 weeks or so. Now, there was a flood in 1999 that lasted for 3 months. The one time I was here, decided I would stay through the flood season, that was here, I was here with my son. And my husband arrived from Delhi in the middle of it. I had to take a boat to get home. Anyway, so the Long Building was not offices. Now a lot of it is offices and some of it are guest rooms. But at that time it was all living space. It was guest house. The Lotus Building was also guest house. We really didn't have any offices. Like when I came here, initially I was Jayapataka Maharaj's secretary. And my office was my typewriter sitting on top of its box, suitcase that it came in the hall, on the veranda. I didn't have an office. I don't know how I managed all that, but anyway, just sit outside and I'd type. Pancharatna Prabhu was assisting Maharaj, Jayapataka Maharaj. At some point, maybe somebody criticized that he had a woman secretary, so he decided to pass it off to Pancharatna, who was a brahmachari. And he was so hard to pin down. He'd be walking down the hallway and kind of over his shoulder, he'd be telling me what he wanted me to do. It was difficult. And that's why there wasn't really enough service after some time to warrant my just staying here and being the secretary. And so that's when I surrendered to going in the kitchen and learning how to cook. Yeah, the long building. Actually, you know, they keep on blocking off the entrances, but originally all of these entrances were open. Like this middle one's been closed for years. So behind the long building wasn't our property. None of that behind the long building was our property. And where the TOVP, the Temple of Vedic Planetarium, is being built, this was a big rice paddy. And this is where they would set up the pandal during the festival time. And until I started building the temple, they continued, you know, up to that time they continued to use that space during festival time for the pandal. So we're seeing the steps to the Lotus building, and there's a picture taken during the 1975 festival where all the devotees stood in a big U shape right in front of the steps on the lawn here. Wasn't a lawn then. I don't know what it was, dirt. But Srila Prabhupada was in that picture. We were there with him. Srila Prabhupada's room is on the second floor. Right below his room was the deity kitchen. We started off in Prabhupada's room, so we know it's pretty much the way it was. All of these entrances where there's the, what are those things called? Those metal gate kind of things? That, yeah, we'll go close and look. So this entrance is how all the entrances to the temple room. Temple room was on the ground floor. So we'll go over there and look at it. So this gate, this is where Prabhupada typically would go in and out of this door. So only at night would it be locked. And there's a similar one right over there. So let me show you where there was more doors that just looked just like this down here. And it's completely changed now. Hare Krishna. Where that drinking water is, there actually always was a tap there. And that was like our only source of water on the ground, you know, outside here. So here, where it says security office, there was an entrance just like the one we saw. And on at the opposite end of the building too. And when Prabhupada arrived, this is where he would come into. So they've sealed it off, but this was the Parikrama path. Right there, Prabhupada's lotus feet touched that marble. So, where this store is, this little bookstore, this was one of the main entrances into the temple because the path from the front gate ended right here. Jai, Lakshmi Priya and Vishnu Priya. Haribol. Hare Krishna. Haribol. Hare Krishna. We didn't have pet elephants back then. So all of this security was not there. There was just in fact, there wasn't a courtyard because this was all added on in the 80s. What was here, this was basically behind the Lotus building, was these two huge tanks in the ground, gobar gas, for gobar gas. There was a little garage. There was a car they had for Prabhupada, picking him up and taking him places. And that little garage was back here. And there was a little house for the generator. There was a generator. Actually, one time the electricity went off for some time and they didn't turn on the generator. And Prabhupada said, if you're not even turning it on when I'm here, when are you turning it on? You know? It was like, weren't just turning it. Nowadays, you know, electricity goes off. It's pretty short time, within half a minute or something, or a minute, they're turning on the generators, but they were reluctant to do it back then. So along the side of the building, there's also a couple of entrances. It was such a big, long temple room and many entrances. We weren't ever thinking about security back then. It just didn't occur to us. Actually, what I remember, there was a whole row of large tulsi plants growing wild. They were like bushes. They were really big. Unfortunately, in the floods, they would usually get drowned. But then they would come back or plant new ones or something like that.